Good evening and welcome to another night of Unchained. Hey, maybe this week it's been a great week for you. Maybe this week it's been a little hard. But either way, you've made it to our meeting tonight. You're watching this either live or recorded, and I just want to encourage you, you've made it through another day. So welcome to all of you, whether you're looking for information or you're in the trenches, battling addiction in your life right now. This is the place for you. So we've been just so blessed, especially last night's testimony of just overcoming fear and those emotions, and just with wonderful testimonies all week. And tonight is going to be another great one. So thank you for coming, and I'm looking forward to the conversation we're going to have later. Just a few reminders. If you haven't registered at this point, please register just so we can keep you updated on what is next and when you can meet Richie in person when he comes in September. We want to keep you informed of that. Also want to remind you, if you have any questions at all, we're going to have a Q&A at the end of our meeting this evening. And also, don't forget, it's not too late to win yourself a copy of Richie's signed book, Darkness Shall Not Overcome, and his story going into more detail with just his journey through his addiction and battle with opioids, and how he, from being chained and feeling hopeless, finally, through the grace of God, achieved freedom in his life. So if that's a book that sounds like you'd be interested in, or maybe there's a family member or friend who you think would be blessed and uplifted by that book, please text Unchained to the phone number on your screen. We'll have it playing through tonight. So otherwise, thank you so much for being with us on another night of Unchained. And tonight we have a very special guest, and he's going to be sharing his testimony with us this evening. So would all of you welcome our guest for tonight, Roy? Say welcome, Roy, in the comments. Good to see you, Roy. Good to have you with us. Thank you for being here tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Absolutely. So just to get started, can you tell us maybe where you're from and what your home life was like growing up?
Grew up in a little town, a little north of Travelers Rest, called Marietta.
Mm-hmm.
If you've ever went to Caesar's Head, you went right through it without even knowing about it, probably. Home life was really good. You know, I had a very loving family. My father, he struggled with alcohol. You know, it was a common part in the household on a daily basis. Non-abusive, like I said, very loving, very involved, but you know, it was prevalent in the home.
So did that have an influence in your journey with addiction later on?
It did. I guess like every American little boy, you want to be like your dad. So, you know, there were some things. I had a first drink of alcohol rather early, but I didn't like it. Kind of fell back into it a little bit in senior year in high school type thing.
Okay. So it sounds like, was it that senior year in high school where you first really when that struggle began for you?
Well, it started in my sophomore year, but it didn't really progress till my senior year. My senior year, I got into using heavier drugs more and more often. So by the time I graduated, it was a pretty regular routine of mine.
And so what led to that use of heavier drugs? What was the reason behind that?
To fit in, I guess. You know, I didn't have anything traumatic happen to me. I didn't have, nothing bad, I guess I want to say. It felt like I never really fit in with anybody, any certain crowd. I was kind of a weird kid. You know, got picked on a lot. When I got into high school and substances, it felt like I could kind of unwind and be the class clown and type thing. So kind of like the attention that brought. A bunch of a negative attention, but it was attention nonetheless.
So it sounds like you came to like the person that the drugs made you become more than who you really were.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought I had found myself, so to speak.
And during that time, you felt like you were more accepted socially.
I felt like I was more accepted. I felt like I had more confidence, which, I mean, I guess I did in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But once the effect of the drugs wore off, there I was with me again.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. So it sounds you said you started sophomore year of high school, and then senior year is when it really started to uh, affect you more, and you started to get more into the heavier drugs. So can you just describe what did that look like, that progression until it just you hit bottom?
well, the progression, it was rather fast. When I started using heavier substances, it picked up. Kind of developed a liking for one in particular, and thought that I had found it. No, this is it. This is the one. Um, Going on through that, I mean, my addiction spanned over 20 years. So, my actual true bottom, it didn't come right away.
Mm.
Yeah.
So over that 20-year period, what did your daily life look like?
Well, I held a job for a
Hmm.
long time and was actually a very good employee. But the use took over, Actually had a very good job working in Greenville. Started working third shift.
Hmm.
And that's kind of where no accountability.
Mm-hmm.
My schedule was totally different from everyone else that I knew.
Mm-hmm.
That's when it really got to be real bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I lost that job, that's kind of when the bottom fell out, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So post high school, you keep kind of this rhythm for 20 years.
Mhm.
Was it still because of that desire to fit in, or these social pressures, or was it something else at that point?
To be honest with you, I just liked getting high,
Hmm.
to be
Mm-hmm.
honest with you. Um, but at some point, it became an addiction.
Hmm.
It quit being fun,
Hmm.
and now it was just a second job that I had.
Hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, I didn't have anything else. Nothing went wrong or kept going wrong or anything like this. I liked the effects of drugs,
Mm-hmm.
and then, the addiction had, it sank its claws into me.
Yeah. So at what point during that 20 years, was it at the end of the 20 years? At what point did you realize that this was a problem?
Well, I realized it was a problem probably 10 years into it,
Hmm.
but I just had accepted that this was the way it was going to be. This is
Mm-hmm.
all I was ever going to be in life. My ambitions, goals that I'd set for myself in high school, all those fell to the wayside. But when my bottom hit, well, I went to treatment 5 times, but it
Mm-hmm.
was always to save a job
Mm-hmm.
or to avoid prison,
Mm-hmm.
so I never really went for help. But when I hit my bottom in 2017, that's when I threw my hands up and I was done.
Mm-hmm. So can you describe like your relationship with your family and what happened during this 20-year time?
Well, I can say that my family put up with a lot. If it had been up to my dad, he'd have tossed me to the side because he had put up with enough. My mother almost loved me to death.
Mm.
They loved me through every bit of it. Um, One of the nicest things my little sister ever told me was when my mom was passing away, she said, "I'm not picking up where she leaves off. I'm not going to do it."
Mm.
That was probably kindest words, stern words,
Mm-hmm.
probably the kindest words she ever told me.
Mm-hmm. And so what she meant by that was, what exactly did she mean by that?
Well, my mom put up with a lot. She
Right.
enabled me, for whatever reasons. Like I said, she almost loved me to death.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to manipulate her.
Mm-hmm.
I knew how to pull on the strings of her heart, make her feel guilty,
Mm-hmm.
and she enabled me. And my sister just told me, she said, I'm not doing that.
Mm.
Pretty much told me you can get right or you can get gone.
Mm. So how did that affect that? Because this is during that 10-year period or towards the end of the 20
This
years?
was the very last of it. This was
Okay.
toward the last of the 20-year period.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was in treatment in 2014. Had actually went to work for the treatment facility, and my father passed away.
Mm.
Didn't deal with that very well. Ended up returning,
Mhm.
going back to
Mhm.
drugs. Um, Left the treatment facility, moved back in with my mom, and had already been using. Found out that she had lung cancer, so I didn't deal with that sickness very well. And the day she passed, I threw my hands up. It was like, I'm done. I'd said some choice words to God, and cussed at him a few, But that's when I felt him. I felt in my spirit God say, "It's about time you got real with me."
So what was your relationship with God during that period?
Distant. I went to a faith-based program in 2006. First time I went inpatient, and I got saved. I had the spiritual experience, but didn't take it. I didn't take salvation nor recovery serious. Didn't think I'd have to give up everything. Like, I'm going to be that one, that one person that doesn't have to.
The
give
one exception.
Yeah, one exception.
Yes.
So, very distant. Like, I knew salvation. I knew it had happened, but I was using my salvation as a license to sin. Basically.
So your father passes away first. 2014, you said?
Yep.
And then your mother passes away not too long after that.
Almost 3 years to the day.
3 years, almost 3 years to the day.
Yep.
So around 2017. 2017. And then it's after that you have this breaking point, and you really pour yourself out before God.
Absolutely.
So can you describe, and obviously you have your sister also also showing this tough love during this same time. So can you explain what made that difference once you've had this conversation with God, and when your sister had those choice words with you? Can you describe the shift that took place after that in recovery?
The shift, I wish I could say it was an instant shift. I went to treatment, and I was still dealing with the effects of the substances, the withdrawal and all that comes along with it. But slowly and surely, I felt the hope come back into my life. Because there at the end, I remember one day it was when it had came out, my sister called me out. She was like, "You're getting high." And I was, of course, I acted offended. How dare you tell me? How dare you accuse me? And I went outside and I was crying, and it was a bright April day. I remember it, April. We just found out my mom had cancer, and I was crying, and I told her. She was like, "What can I do to help?" And I said, "Jen, as bright as it is out here, my world is dark." So when I threw my hands up, that light started coming back. I could start feeling hope again.
So, as you said, it was a process. It wasn't an overnight change, but there was a sliver of hope that was starting to appear. So can you walk us through, what did that next year look like for you once you made that decision to take that next step?
Well, that next year was, it was pivotal. I went to treatment, 8-week program, was asked to go back to work for them, and held several jobs. Was asked to be a leader in the ministry. But during that time, I had to address a lot of stuff. I had to address a lot of insecurities that I had. Had to address some fears head on. Really tackle them. Had to get honest with myself. So, and that was rough. A lot of tears in that year.
So, you mentioned before that the loss of your mother and your father you didn't take too well, and how that you went back to the drugs for an escape. So during that year of recovery, how did you cope with that grief and loss? As I'd imagine that you were still suffering from that as well.
I was. I can say God gave me a pure peace about my mother's passing. There were some things I had to work through, some shame and some guilt, resentments and things. But God had given me a peace and gave it to me right away. So, I can. There were moments and there still are. It's grief, you know, it comes.
Yeah, yeah. Of
There were
course.
moments when, you know, I felt like I just had to white knuckle it, you know, the grief part, and just cry it out. A good support network is what really came in. My church family, my recovery family. So that was key.
So how long was it? You said you went to the 8-week program and that you resumed your job there, but how long was it uh, until you really truly felt free?
I was probably 2.5, 3 years into my recovery journey. You know, prior to that point, I'd made it, I think, 18 months in recovery. That was around the time my father passed.
Yeah.
But I didn't. Wasn't one of those things where I was sitting there waiting on it. You know, I can't wait to be free. I can't wait to feel free. It was just, you know, one day that aha moment. You just like, man, I am living a life of freedom today. But that was about, I'd say, probably closer to 3 years in my recovery journey.
And what did that day look like for you when you had that moment? When did you realize it?
To be honest with you, I was managing the facility. I was there because it amazed me. I was like, oh my gosh, you know, I'm the adult in the room here, you know.
Yeah.
So I was there at work one day, and it just these thoughts came to me, and I was like, my goodness, you know, 2.5, 3 years ago, I'd have never thought, you know, somebody was going to hire me to lead, you know, a ministry full of men, and it just came to me. I was like, wow, you know. Of course, tears came shortly after that, and that you know, just gratitude kind of consumed me.
So, how did your relationship with your family, mainly your sister, what did that look like?
She was distant for a lot of. She moved out of state around the time that my addiction was probably 10 years into it at this point. So she was distant, and I understand why. She distanced herself from me for being hurt by me. You know, she didn't like what my parents were going through. She didn't condone or agree with any of my behaviors. So she was distant, but she was there to love me through every bit of it. And that relationship's probably one of the strongest I have today.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So what was it like for her when you had that conversation of, I'm free? What was her reaction?
Tearful, you know, just happy for me. You know, that's, you know, tears of joy is all I can say. You know, very proud of me. You know, she believed in me the whole time. I just took me a little longer to believe in myself.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, what does if you were to look at your life now, how is it different than the life that you went through for 20 to 30 years going back into high school?
Goodness. Yeah, significantly different. Self-esteem is there, substance-free. I'm not fully in touch with my emotions, but I'm a lot more in touch with my emotions than I ever have been. You know, I don't mind apologizing today. You know, instead of deflecting and pointing blame, I'll accept blame today. You know, it's not my favorite thing to do,
Yeah.
but you know, I will apologize.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
little things like that. I have my dignity back. You know, self-esteem. The goals I've set for in my life now. You know, I actually have a chance of achieving them. I got married going on 3 years ago.
Oh,
So
wow.
I never thought I'd be married.
Congratulations.
Well,
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So for those who are watching, and if there's someone who is going through addiction right now, whatever it may be, behavioral or substance, what would you have to say to them?
Tough love. You know, addiction is a disease. You know, it's a struggle. As I know for myself, there was a lot of times I didn't want to do it. You know, love them, but don't enable them. You know, because those individuals with substance use issues were master manipulators. Very good at it. It's almost an art to them, to us. I would suggest, you know, tough love. Listen, listen to them, but don't enable.
Wow. Well, thank you so much, Roy, just for sharing your story. And, I appreciate your vulnerability and honesty with us. And just want to, again, remind all of you, if you have questions that you would like to ask Roy at the end of our program, leave it, just comment it in the chat, or you can always text the number on the screen, and you can send it that way. It'll be a little more anonymous for you. But once again, thank you so much, Roy, for just your testimony. And yeah, I was blessed by it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. All right, so at this time, once again, remember, if you haven't, to sign up for the book giveaway, or feel free to drop a question. And can we just collectively say thanks, Roy? Can you just say that in the comments if you appreciated Roy's testimony for us tonight? We really appreciate all of you coming out and sharing your story with us. At this time, we have another inspiring message from Richie Halverson about the hope that you can have and the freedom that is waiting for you from your struggles, from your addictions.
Welcome to Unchained, Hope and Healing from Addiction. My name is Richie Halverson. For years, I struggled with addiction to opioids, but when I became willing to do something different and I surrendered to a new way of life, man, I started seeing those chains begin to fall off. And the thing about addiction is over time, the burden and the guilt and the shame begin to pile up. You hurt a lot of people when you're in active addiction. And a lot of people are hurt by addicts, and often addicts are hurt people. And the people that they're often hardest on is themselves. One of the important breakthroughs that we have to experience is forgiveness. We have to forgive ourselves, we have to forgive others, and we have to allow ourselves to be forgiven. In 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 20, it says, God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. You see, to live an unchained life in a messed up world where people do some crazy stuff, we're going to have to learn how to forgive. Real forgiveness is something called reconciliation. It's not just saying I'm sorry. Reconciliation is basically restoring a relationship to its original condition before the pain and the betrayal happened. Saying you forgive someone but making their life miserable, that's not forgiveness. Saying you forgive someone but constantly reminding them of their mistake, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's absolutely necessary if you're going to live an unchained life. If you're going to be freed from the past that's holding you back. Of all the 12 steps that I hear people talk about, even if they've never been through recovery, is steps 8 and 9. I believe that's because those are the ones that are dealing with reconciliation. Those are the ones that are dealing with forgiveness. They are probably the most intimidating. So step 8 is making a list of all persons we had harmed, and we became willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9 is make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I always thought making amends was saying sorry until I worked this step and discovered this word, reconciliation. Real amends is working to restore the relationship. Real amends means stopping the behavior that keeps causing me to have to say, I'm sorry. In fact, sorry without change makes it worse. If I keep saying I'm sorry for a behavior, but I don't discontinue that behavior, that makes it worse. My wife got so sick of hearing me say, I'm sorry I stole from her. I'm sorry I got high. I'm sorry I was late to pick up the kids. I'm sorry. I didn't even come close to picking up the kids. I'm sorry. Until one day she got so sick of it, she looked at me and she said, yeah, you got that part right. You are sorry, Richie. You see, real amends requires change. Change is hard. But friends, nothing is more freeing than real forgiveness, reconciliation. Man, when I think of forgiveness, there's this person in the Bible that immediately comes to my mind. His name was Joseph. Okay, so his brothers, they beat him up, they throw him in a pit, they sell him into slavery falsely. And then after he goes to slavery, he gets purchased, and the guy he's working for, his wife comes on to Joseph. He gets falsely accused. Then he gets thrown into prison unjustly. Man, the guy can't catch a break. While in prison, he interprets the dream of the royal cupbearer. He tells him, hey, in 3 days, you're getting out of here. But could you just do me one favor? In Genesis 40:14, he says, mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. But notice, verse 23 says, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph remains in prison for 2 more years. Now, I want to be honest. The cupbearer was lucky that Joseph wasn't me. Because if and when I got promoted to vice pharaoh, first order of business, bring in the royal cupbearer. But this is the thing. Revenge sounds good at first, but revenge will ruin you in the end. It may have an immediate feeling, a rush of endorphins and feel good. But friends, the price and the chain is far too heavy of a burden to bear. When you look at Joseph's life, most of his pain came from one place, his family. You do know the hardest people to forgive are people in your family. And that's because you can't ignore the people you live with. It's easy to forgive someone you don't see much. In fact, I would suggest we don't really forgive them, we just forget them, right? It's easy to forgive people that we don't see very much, but the person that you got to work with and live with and raise kids with and, man, you got to sleep next to, that is hard. Joseph didn't deserve everything that happened to him. Everything that happened to him wasn't right. Nothing was justified that the brothers did. But when you're following this story, it does seem like Joseph might have been a little bit hard to live with. Okay, he seemed to have been a little bit of a tattletale. He seemed to be a little spoiled. His father loved him. He got a special coat. None of the other brothers got a special coat. He seemed a bit of a show-off. I think he was probably a little annoying. Hey guys, I had another dream last night. Who cares, Joseph? But according to Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers hated him. No matter how annoying Joseph was, he didn't deserve the hate. It says that they couldn't say anything nice about him. They were jealous of him. Let me tell you, jealousy, hate, and anger, those chains will kill you and burden you and crush you as fast as any drug. These brothers are going to discover that the short-term satisfaction of getting even isn't worth the long-term price that you have to pay. While Joseph was in prison, think about that, 13 years in prison for what his brothers did. With every bowl of prison food that he had to eat, every beating from a prison guard he had to get, every second, minute, hour, day, year lost, Joseph was reminded of what his brothers did to him. But as you study this, something jumped out at me as I was reading this story. You keep running into this same phrase. In Genesis 39:2, it says that the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in Potiphar's home, the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. In Pharaoh's court, the Lord was with Joseph. No matter where you are right now, God is with you. And so instead of wasting time planning his revenge, Joseph spends his time getting to know God and heal. Instead of staying in the problem of what happened to him, Joseph gets into the solution. You see, revenge only hurts. Resentments only hold us back. They do not help the pain that you've experienced in life. Instead of letting the pain make him bitter, Joseph let pain make him better. Man, I experienced a lot of pain in active addiction. I lost a lot of stuff, and I almost lost my family, and I almost lost my life. I went through a lot of pain. And so I'm going to allow that pain. Instead of being kept prison in that pain, I want to experience freedom from that pain. I'm going to use that pain in order to push me forward. You see, Joseph let the pain make him better. We're not responsible for everything that happens to us. Some of us may have had some very terrible things that were done to us. And you know what? We're not responsible for everything that happened to us. But we are responsible for the way that we respond to what happens to us. The first time I ever worked step 8 and 9 in recovery, man, I had a massive list. I had to make a list of all the people that I had harmed in my active addiction. People I stole from, people I lied to, people I endangered, people I hurt. The people you love the most, you usually hurt the most. But like Joseph, I knew that I wasn't alone. You see, just as God was with Joseph, God was with me. God put people in my life that were healthy, that were going places where I wanted to go. I had a sponsor who had gone through what I had gone through, who had made amends, who had reconciled his relationships, who was there to help me. They say the steps are in order for a reason. There are people who want to jump over step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go all the way to 8 and 9 and start making amends. Don't do that. They're in order for a reason. Each principle builds on the next and prepares you for the next one. And so it was helpful to have a sponsor who reminded me of this process of reconciliation. He reminded me not to put expectations on these amends. He said, Richie, look, don't go into this amends expecting them to take it a certain way. Don't expect them to receive your amends and receive you back in open arms. He reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their reaction, but my action. I'm not responsible for anybody else, just my action. And so I started making these amends. And you know what? I went up to some people and they were angry. I went up to some people, man, they said, I don't ever want to see you again. I went up to other people and they were upset. They were sad. They were hurt. How could you do this to me? But you know what? I went to other people and they were happy. But you know what? Regardless of how it was received, my burden was lifting, which with each amends I made, with every reconciliation, my chains started breaking. In the Lord's Prayer that Jesus teaches the disciples, it's interesting because it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Notice it doesn't say before or after. It says as. As we forgive, so we are forgiven. Only when we forgive do we start feeling forgiven. In Matthew 6:14 through 15, it says, if you forgive others, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you. Now, I don't believe this is saying that God's up in heaven keeping track and he's saying, okay, they finally forgave his sin. Now I'll forgive one of his sins. Okay, 2 sins, now 2 sins. No, I don't believe that's what it's saying. What it's saying is only when we receive God's forgiveness can we adequately ever give forgiveness. Matthew 18:35 says we have to forgive from the heart. Matthew 12:34 says out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. The reason some of us can't ever forgive is we've never allowed ourselves to be forgiven. We have no forgiveness to give. You know, our hearts are, there's no room for forgiveness in our hearts. And the problem is you can't give out of a deficit. And so before you can ever give forgiveness, we've got to receive forgiveness. And as I was making those amends, man, I started feeling free, regardless of the way it was received, regardless of whether someone accepted or not. It was about me doing the right thing. It was about me breaking the chain of shame, breaking the chain of guilt, breaking those chains. But the person that I had at the very top of my amends list was myself. I had to learn to forgive myself. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. But let me tell you, freedom comes with forgiveness. When we get to the end of this story, Joseph's brothers show up. It's kind of interesting. The tables have turned. It's a drought going on, and Joseph's brothers show up. They need his help now. They don't recognize him, but boy, Joseph recognizes them. They're the brothers that beat him up and threw him away. And throughout this encounter, Joseph has to keep excusing himself in order to hide his weeping. Because you guys, real forgiveness is hard. It's not easy. Real forgiveness is it's a mini death. It's not easy. And so Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can really trust them. You see, forgiveness is not being a punching bag. Forgiveness doesn't mean you just excuse bad behavior. Forgiveness is not enabling someone to continue. That's not forgiveness. No, Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can trust them. People will be clean for 5 days and they'll come up to me and say, yeah, my wife still doesn't trust me. My mom still doesn't trust me. My dad doesn't trust me. You've been clean for 5 days. And look, that's great, but it's going to take more than 5 days. You know? That's great. You haven't lost your temper in 10 days, but you've been losing your temper for 20 years. It's going to take some time for them to trust you. You used for years. Maybe you lied for years. Maybe you had an affair for years. Maybe you've been a jerk for years, right? A trust violated for years doesn't heal overnight. Trust is going to take time to reestablish. It took time for my wife to trust me again. It took time for my wife to be open to opening her heart to receive me again. You see, for reconciliation to happen between Joseph and his brothers, trust has to be reestablished. And trust can only be reestablished through time. Not I'm sorry, but time. Joseph pretends like he's going to put the youngest brother, Benjamin, in prison. He is the last son of Jacob's late wife, but in almost the exact opposite way. Instead of doing to Benjamin what they did to Joseph, these brothers beg to take Benjamin's place. Instead of allowing him to go into prison as they had done with Joseph, they asked to go in his place. You see, friends, this is the key. Joseph is not the only one who's been in a prison. In fact, his brothers have been in a prison, a mental prison, a physical prison, much longer than Joseph has. I've discovered that my mental prisons were far worse than any jails or institutions or prisons that I ever went to in my active addiction. These brothers need to be set free. They need the freedom of forgiveness and reconciliation. Genesis 45, 1 through 2, notice what it says. Then Joseph could not control himself. Before all those who stood by him, he cried. He wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard him, and the household of the Pharaoh heard him. You see, friends, forgiveness hurts, but it's where the healing can begin. It's where the tears can happen, and it's where you finally feel this weight lifted. Genesis 50:20. Notice what Joseph says. He says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people. In Romans 8:28, it says, for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. This is probably one of the most misquoted scriptures. This doesn't mean that everything that happens is from God, because not everything that happens in life comes from God. This doesn't mean that everything that happens in life is good. What it's saying is that everything that happens, even bad things, God can bring something good out of it. Just look at the life of Joseph. In fact, nowhere do we see this reality more than in the cross of Jesus Christ. In Romans 5:7, it says, one will scarcely die for a righteous person. It's hard enough to forgive and take a bullet for someone we love, let alone someone we hate. And yet we read in Romans, God showed his love for us in that while we were sinners, now in the Greek, it's enemies. While we were enemies, Christ died for us. I like the way the Message paraphrase puts it. God put his love on the line for us by offering his son in sacrificial death while we were of no use whatever to him. You see, often we forgive people because we still have use for them. We live with them, we work with them. You know what? I'll enjoy life better if I just kind of forgive them or say I forgive them. But if we only forgive someone to get something out of it, it's not real forgiveness. It's a transaction. According to Romans 5:8, God forgave us when we were only a liability, when we brought nothing to the table. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. But friends, when you are really hurt, when you really have reason to be upset, when you have a reason to resent, but instead of taking it out on them, you absorb the pain and you forgive them and restore the relationship to where it was before you hurt, that's where real healing can begin. That's where real freedom is. On the cross, Jesus forgives his executioners. He says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And like Joseph, Jesus was abandoned and betrayed by 12 brothers, his disciples. Judas and Peter usually take all the blame, but Mark 14:50 says they all forsook him and fled. But the good news, and it's the core of living an unchained life, is that Jesus, instead of retaliating or repaying, Jesus started reconciling. Like Joseph, Jesus ends up at the right hand of power. And instead of using his power to condemn his betrayers, he uses his power to save his betrayers. Instead of giving me what I deserved, Christ took my shame to the cross and he killed it to set me free. C.S. Lewis said, to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you. When the world did its worst, God gave his very best. Let his perfect forgiveness free you right now. All of us need to feel the chain of forgiveness break. Let it break you, break that chain of guilt and shame and hurt and pain right now. Give it to God. Let him set you free.
Hey, that was a wonderful message from Richie tonight, dealing with forgiveness and that mental prison. So please, at this time, if you have any questions, maybe about Richie's message or questions for Roy, now is the time. Type them in the chat. We'll be sure to ask Roy those questions or text the number on your screen. So our first question for this evening, Roy, if you could go back in time, what would you tell your teenage self?
One thing.
Or a few. We'll make exceptions, you know.
Yeah. Golly. You know, I've been asked this question before, and I've had so many different answers. One thing I could tell my younger self is accept Jesus earlier. You know, I waited till mid-30s before I accepted him. So, yeah.
Next question. Roy, what role specifically did your recovery family and your faith family play? What helps and what doesn't help?
Well, my faith family and my recovery family played significant roles in it. I was sharing with somebody just the other day, if I take my faith away, my recovery goes with it. My faith family, there's a lot of my faith family that are also part of my recovery family. These are vital in my recovery. And if I don't utilize them, I the one that, not only me, I'm the one that suffers from it. My loved ones suffer from it. And, you know, I can still display those old behaviors without putting the substances in. So staying grounded with my faith family and my recovery family are key.
Well, do you feel like you've found that place where you belong now?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, I am so much comfortable with myself. Like I said earlier, you know, I was a weird kid. Comes to find out I'm a weird adult too, you know. But I'm comfortable with that today.
Yeah.
You know, I can accept. We all got our quirks and our, you know, I'm okay with it today.
Yeah. And that faith and recovery family, I imagine, helped with feeling accepted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was nice to know that there were people who loved me because I'm me. You know, not for what they thought I could get, or you know, I have people in my life that show me true love.
Well, powerful stuff. Next question from Sammy and Mom. How was others setting boundaries with you while you How was others setting boundaries with you while you were in active addiction important to your recovery? How are boundaries important to your recovery today? So two questions there. How were boundaries helpful with active addiction in your recovery? And then the second question, how are they important for you today?
Boundaries in my active addiction were obviously the boundaries that people put up against me, and I understand that now. For a long time, I didn't want to. Like, how dare you shut me out? You know, they were protecting themselves. Boundaries in my life today, you know, they're very important. There's some people that have some certain boundaries to me, you know, and I can't blame them for that. I've also had to put up boundaries to people in my life, so I'm seeing the importance of them from both sides now.
And those boundaries are you set up for like some people? Can you describe that a little more?
The boundaries I set up for some people, you know, love them from a distance. I'm not going to cold shoulder them, but I'm not going to allow myself to get too close in certain ways. You know, and it's protection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, great questions. Why does it take so long for so many addicts to admit that they have a problem?
I think I can speak for myself on this, you know, and it may be true for a lot of others that struggle with addiction. I always thought that I can get a hold of this. I can get out ahead of it, in front of it, and you know, just let me do it a little bit longer, and I can grab a hold of this thing. But you know, addiction takes so much from you. You know, so by the time you really realize you've got a problem, there's a good chance that you have a physical addiction to the substance, and that adds a whole nother, you know, problem to the situation.
So it really it comes down to when are you willing to give up control of your own problem and say I can't do it?
Absolutely. You know, I think that to be honest with you, I wanted to quit a long time before I actually quit. I just, you know, I didn't feel like I had the strength. I feel like I couldn't do it. That was how I dealt with everything in my life. The emotions. It was my coping mechanism. It was my celebration. It was my grief. It was, you know, my depression. Everything. So, you know, I used them in all areas. So,
Yeah. Well. Thank you. Your sister made a difference by confronting you. Is that a good practice for those who have addicted family members?
I think so. I speak for myself. In my addiction, I would lie to your face, and was good at it. That's the sad part about it. You know, I think confronting people, I think, is good. It can be done in a very positive way. It can be done in a very negative way as well. You know, confronting people, nobody wants to be made a fool of. So doing it in a crowd full of people might not be the best thing.
Yeah.
One-on-one or two-on-one, a family intervention. I think confrontation is very effective. Yeah.
So, and just kind of going off of that question, you mentioned there was a day where you realized, oh, I'm the adult in the room.
Yeah.
So does that mean that you've kind of now have you ever had to switch places now and been that person with somebody?
Yes, I have. I have. Yep. So, and it's, I tell you, somebody asked me while it was going on, you know, how does this make you feel? And I said, this is justice. They were like, what do you mean? I said, everything I put my family through, I get to see it from this side now, you know? So, yeah.
Wow. Powerful. Another question. Can you elaborate on how your mother almost loved you to death and how others can see the signs that they may be loving someone to death? And how are they being hurtful and not helpful?
By stating that my mother almost loved me to death, she did, you know, and I don't mean that in any negative way. I knew how to manipulate her. She enabled me for whatever reason, you know. Like I said, my father would have been done with me. There's a lot of these years that I spent in their household doing substances in their household. But my mom just, she wouldn't let me go without a place to live, so be honest with you, if she'd have put her foot down and told me you got to go, I'd like to think that I'd have been more inclined to get help, a little earlier. But it is what it is. It takes what it takes.
Yeah.
As far as signs for other families to, look for if they're loving someone to death is, are you enabling them? I could talk my mom out of almost anything, and I'm not a parent, so I can only imagine how difficult it is to see your child, in that condition.
Yeah. Yeah. So, another question from Kyle. If you could go back to your younger self, what would you have liked to have heard that may have steered you to a different path?
I'd like to say that, if I had been in my 20s and somebody said, hey, you're going to turn 41 your sixth time in rehab, I'd like to think they'd be like, wow.
Yeah, yeah.
Those are the things that people leave out when it comes to substance use, the risks of doing it and everything, but they fail to tell you what it's actually going to take from you.
Yeah, the years.
The years.
That
it's kind of a running joke. I tell people, I'm like, I went to a party in high school and I woke up, 30 years later with a 20-year drug addiction.
Yep.
So it happens fast, and it takes so much more than just material. Your self-will, your dignity. It consumes you with shame, and guilt, and that's some tough stuff to wade through.
Yeah. Have you found that offering that perspective in the addicts that you've mentored or talked to, has that helped?
I think so. Yeah. As long as they're willing to hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. So how can you tell when it's the right time for them to hear it?
I don't know that it's kind of one of those things where you just like, all right, now's the time.
Yeah. Just kind of go by your gut.
Go by your gut.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times it's, done in, I have no other options. I've tried everything else at this point.
Yeah.
Let me shoot from the hip on this one type thing.
Right. Nice. A message or a question from William Strong. You mentioned that you told yourself you could have fun and quit later. Is there a danger of permanent damage if you put it off?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there is. There's so much damage that can come with substance use. The brain, organs, everything. Yeah. There's a lot of danger.
How do you approach goal setting and measure progress in your recovery?
How do I approach goal setting? If I have something I want to achieve, I look at it and I have to ask myself, is this a realistic goal? Is this something I can do? And if it is, then we set it in motion. When do I want this goal? Is this a 1-year goal? Is it a 5-year goal? Is this on down the road? And just take baby steps towards it. Kind of break it down to, all right, I need to get here before I can get there. And just kind of crawl to it sometimes.
Yeah. Do you feel like, did you develop more of that step-by-step mentality once you successfully recovered? Did you find that helped you?
No, actually, I found it working the 12 steps.
Yeah.
Baby steps with it. And my sponsor had told me, he said, you didn't become addicted overnight. This stuff's not going to come to you overnight.
Yeah. Wonderful. Can you describe a day in your life now compared to when you were struggling with addiction?
I have luxury problems today. I can sum it up by saying that. Don't get me wrong, life's still life. But, the bad days I have today are nothing compared to what they used to be. I can handle things a lot healthier. I don't want to say easier, a lot healthier. I'm quick to pray about things. I'm quick to ask help for things, a different perspective. So it's a night and day difference.
Wow. Yeah. Well, those are all the questions that we have for tonight. And now at this time, once again, thank you again, Roy, just for answering our questions, being so open and honest about your life and testimony. We appreciate you.
Absolutely.
So at this time, we are going to announce our book winner for tonight, and that is Jacqueline. You are the lucky book winner for Richie's book, Darkness Will Not Overcome, a signed copy. So Jacqueline will be getting in touch with you later on to find out how we can get this book to you. Don't worry. And again, we just want to remind you that, if you don't end up getting a book, Richie is coming in September in person. And I know that he would be happy to not only talk with you about your experience, but sign the book as well. So, but otherwise, yes, thank everybody. Thank Roy again in the comments. And if you've gotten something, if you felt blessed or have particularly enjoyed tonight's program, please feel free to like or subscribe and share with others this program so that they can also receive this message of hope that we're trying to spread to our community here in Spartanburg and, of course, abroad. So I want to remind you, please join us again tomorrow evening, 7 p.m., same time, same place, for another story of hope and healing from addiction and how you can be unchained from those things that weigh you down, just like our friend Roy has experienced in his life. So I'll see you then tomorrow at 7 p.m. See you, everyone.